we can convene again, of course, to continue conversations. But we're grateful, especially this time of the school year, for you all to find a little time to be with us. Thanks. Senator Kushner, would you like to say anything? Oh, did we lose her? We may have. All right, well, we might as well just open up. I think the first discussion item was the annual inspection guidance. And we'd heard that some districts were having some questions about what the guidance is. And so if people want to jump in sort of with what they're hearing, what their concerns are, how we can help provide clarity or support, I think that would be ideal.
If you want, I can go first, General Assessor.
Okay.
We have gotten some quotes. We're kind of in a unique situation. We're also doing HVAC renovation under the marvelous state grant that we're joyous that we got at our high school. So as part of that, at the end, we have to do commissioning services. So we got from the commissioning agent and one other company prices to also do the school air requirements, because that is actually more arduous than the commissioning, turning the system on. They only do like a 10% sample, where the state requires more like 100% sample. But I can give you some prices for a smaller high school, just if you're interested in. We were only able to get 2 quotes, so I'm hearing from some other people that that's an issue. But the commissioning was $40,000, and then the state act requirements was $60,795 on top of that. So probably if we were going out just for the state requirements, the high school would be 110,000 ish, just to give you a kind of a ballpark. But we were able to get the two prices, and by combining it with the construction grant, it's certainly going to be cheaper for us. But it just gives a little information on the ballpark.
So John, help me understand a little better, because I'm thinking about the annual inspection as the tools for schools inspection, but you
Yeah.
seem to be talking about something different, no?
No, they're both. When you get the school grant, school air grant,
Yep.
we do all this equipment replacement. You then have to commission it, turn it on,
Yep.
make sure it's working right. So that process overlaps the school significantly, but the state requirements go beyond that, because they only do a percentage of the units. So this goes beyond and does other things too. So I just giving you the share that, combining with the school air thing is something that should probably be promoted, that as you're turning it on, there's some savings to also
I
do the
see.
mandatory requirements at the same time. It's not eligible for this. You can't double dip, but it does make it more cost effective.
And what you're describing, would that not fall under meeting the requirements for the 5-year
Yes,
inspection?
so that's
Okay.
our first of the 5 years.
Yeah. Okay. So separate from the tools for schools annual inspection, but just sharing that you have the opportunity once you do these upgrades to kind of tick the box for your 5-year inspection.
Right.
Okay.
And it's done in a more cost effective way.
That's
So anyone
great.
that's doing a school air project under that separate grant, they may want to, at the end of it, also do the get prices to do the required, get it off the 5-year list.
Lou, I think you had your hand up next.
Thank you. I just got a message to let us know that somebody's trying to watch on CTN. The audio is being obstructed by music from another presentation, so it's hard to hear. I don't know if folks at CTN can look into that and make sure that that's coming through clearly. But afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday. I just wanted to, I see hand up, and I know that there was some specific things he wanted to touch on, and so I'll just kind of set the table from like a bird's eye view point of view. There was some changes that came through this year in terms of the inspection requirements that number one were aimed at making providing districts with a little bit more flexibility around the 5-year inspection. There are some issues and some kind of questions around interpretation as far as that goes. But I think the main thing that we're concerned about and that we're hearing from our coalition members is that there is a real lack of clarity in terms of, number one, what schools are really expected to do under the 1-year inspection. We've had some conversations with DAS leading up to where we are now, and they've been very helpful in terms of populating the website with like the tools for schools resources and that kind of thing. But recent conversations that we've had with DAS and with others have been along the lines of we really need to provide some clear guidance to the schools. Number one, to make sure that they understand right now the 1-year inspection is really where their energy and their attention should be focused, because there's it appears based on the interpretation we're getting from DAS and from the attorneys that schools are not even allowed to begin their 5-year inspections until 2026. And so we want to make sure that folks are at least focusing on the 1-year inspection and are in a position to meet their deadlines come January to make sure everybody's done this. And in order to do that, schools need to be either setting up a tools for schools committee or working through their health and safety committees to make this happen. And as far as we can tell, it's a real mixed bag. And I think that that's probably the most optimistic kind of way I can spin that. So those are some of the questions we're hoping to kind of establish here.
So 2 things, if I understand them correctly. One is people need more guidance on how to do the tools for schools. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then 2, and was not my interpretation in the last conversations we've had that districts should not begin their 5-year inspection until the 2026. Is that what we moved it to? It's right. that was as late as possible. You had flexibility to begin, but not that you cannot begin before then. So, Senator Kushner.
Yeah, I understand. I agree with you, Jen, Representative Bleeper. And I think the problem is that in the statute, we may not have gotten it exactly right. But I think we should assume that we'll be able to fix that because I agree, Representative, we need to make sure that people and they need to get these 5 years. So that might be where the confusion lies.
Yeah. So I think it's just helpful if we reiterate here, that's not the intent. Certainly if you were complying with prior iterations of this law and you were, in compliance with the prior timeline, you are not going to be penalized for that. And so Senator Kushner and I are aware of some ambiguity and we'll be working to correct that.
Great.
All right. I think, Lou, is it okay if we go over to Matt? And I think
Please.
probably like what we can do in terms of guidance for tools to schools will continue to flesh out through the conversation. Does that sound reasonable? Okay, thanks. Matt.
Thanks. Thank you, Representative, and thank you, Senator Kushner, especially during this busy campaign season for putting this meeting together. I know your time is very valuable, and we all thank you for doing it. So I think maybe it would be helpful for everybody if we pulled back a little bit and just let's recap and get a deeper view about everything. There's a lot of questions that come up with 1-year and 5-year inspections and how they're different and what's required of them. And I think it's really important that John spoke as well about being compliant with the grant program and being a recipient of the grant, that at the end of that process, they're responsible to do commissioning, and how the commissioning of that project could nicely overlap with what the requirements of the 5-year are, and maybe wind up saving some money in the long term rather than waiting a couple of years to get his done. So that's a really great point. I'm glad you brought it up, John. So the 1-year inspections and the tools for schools, I think it's important to remind everybody that this is not intended to be a service that you would farm out and have to pay for. This is supposed to be a walkthrough of the schools by people that work within the schools, which is a cursory checklist of all of the different things, the canaries in the coal mine, so to speak, that will inform of anything that's changed significantly since your last 5-year inspection. The 5-year inspections are supposed to be more thorough, provided by professionals within the industry and subject matter experts that can actually tell you what the actual ventilation of the school is. The walkthroughs of the schools and the 1-year inspections with the tools for schools is really supposed to be just that, a walkthrough. And I think some of the challenges that we have is that the current forms that we have for tools for schools might not be representative of what the intention of a 1-year inspection should be. So as our coalition has gone through and reviewed many of these forms, we said, hey, this seems like it is more suited for what a 5-year inspection would be. There's certain things that could get narrowed down. What we don't want to do is bog down the people performing this and create a burden on them. We want this to be something that they should not have to pay for. They shouldn't have to hire consultants to go do it. Certainly now, if you're testing for radon, which is one specific thing, that gets done by a professional. But that's only done every 3 years now. So do you have your radon paperwork? That's a yes or no, right? You don't have to go and hire somebody to test your radon every year because we do tools for schools every year. So I think that there's some confusion about tools for schools is not a prescriptive program by the EPA. It's a guideline for as a repository for all of these different bits of information that could come from different areas. I know that our legislation, when it was originally crafted, or maybe the second iteration, specifically said that DAS could lean on subject matter experts to help determine what forms to use and how to get them on the website. I know that I was reached out to by DAS during the initial part of that process and offered some feedback on some of the things. But I think that the best thing that we could do to help clear up the confusion is to encourage DAS to have a charrette with some of the providers, stakeholders, and subject matter experts, because frankly, DAS is not experts in ventilation or tools for schools, nor should they be. We need to be able to provide them with the resources and the knowledge bank to be able to help them put out a program and forms that are applicable for what we're trying to accomplish and are vetted through more subject matter experts than not. I think I could leave my 1-year comments there.
Thanks, Matt, for that. Before I go to you, Anne, did anyone have a response to sort of Matt's comments, and particularly around the 1 year? Awesome. All right. If you didn't speak up now, doesn't mean you can't speak up later. All right, Anne.
I probably share the confusion with 1 year, 5 year, and then an annual tools for schools assessment, which I think is different than the sort of ventilation testing and balancing assessments done by professionals. My thought with the tools for schools program is that there would not be any forms that would be universally generated via DAS, but that rather schools would avail themselves of the kit, the forms, and the resources provided through this no-cost, low-cost resource. I've had the opportunity to look back. I used to be a trainer for tools for schools to get schools launched, but obviously the program itself helps them identify what sources to look at, what to look for outside and inside the school, how to pull together symptom surveys with mapping and a lot of good ideas. They have some videos. I rewatched all the videos, how to launch your program, taking action, how to do your walkthrough. They're pretty good. A lot of the program hasn't been updated in about 5 or 6 years. Certainly, they've added some COVID resources, et cetera. But my thought was rather it would be best for a school district to say they have a committee and they're doing annual walkthroughs using the resources, but not ask them to submit specific forms at that time. Because I think that gets confused with the more detailed forms that the DAS was asking for guidance on in terms of how to document that you did your assessment of the HVAC system.
So and other people, please chime in. I just want to reiterate, like the 1 year and the tools for school are the same thing.
But
So-
that's an annual, that's every year, right?
Exactly right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not like
Exactly.
1 year rebalancing or something and every
Exactly.
tools for schools. Those are the same thing. And whether or not to have DAS, like have districts confirm they actually did it. We've spent a bunch of time, I think, talking about that because currently districts are supposed to be doing this every other year and we know that they're not, which was why we sort of added this other layer of accountability for DAS to require districts to like confirm that they've done it. And whether that just be like they made it available on their website. I don't know what, and Melissa, I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there a tools for schools form that we're asking districts to fill out?
Thanks, Rep. Leeper. There is a form on our website. It's a Microsoft form that schools are required to fill out. And that lists all the tools for schools checklists. And the reason that we're asking for those tools for schools checklists is because the statute specifically says that to meet this requirement, they have to use tools for schools. And it also requires the boards of education or the schools to post their forms on their websites. So we're trying to meet that statutory requirement by asking for them to complete those forms and then also asking for the location of where they posted them on their website.
And
See, oh, sorry.
I just wanted to jump in for a minute because the tools for schools and the folks on the coalition will remember back in 2022 when we started working on this, it used to be, I think, every 3 years that you had to do the tools for schools, and we moved it up. And so I think that this requirement has been out there for schools for a long time. And we're trying to make sure it happened, make sure that the results of that inspection, that tools for schools inspection were available to the public and available to the state. And I mean, that was sort of the basis for all of this. And as I recall it, but maybe there are others who weren't working on a zillion things that at that moment, and maybe you can elaborate on that.
May I jump in, Representative?
Please.
I thought we were actually meeting to work on the 5-year. Like we've got to completely separate these discussions because every time I get in a discussion about this, people are confusing the 1 year and the 5-year. I agree with Matt. The 1 year is very straightforward. It's a self-assessment walkthrough. I like the canary in the coal mine thing. The last district I was at, our facilities manager was going through that checklist. And he's like, oh, here's a program we have to get on. It's kind of like future steps for action. It's an assessment tool. You fill out the forms, they're available on the website. You bring them up in a board meeting, you post them, you're good to go. I think the program that we're having a lot of challenges with are the 5-year. So I walked into this thinking that's what we were going to discuss today and solve the problems that we have around procurement, especially the gentleman who kicked us off. I wanted to jump in after he spoke as well, because that's the problem I've been seeing, with various districts as well, is the checklist on DAS's website of the statutory boxes you have to check for the 5-year are very general. So districts are obtaining wildly different pricing depending on, one, who's doing the work, and two, the interpretation of the person doing the work. It's almost like you could take each one of those bullet points and make as much or as little as you want with it. So I was hoping what we would do in this group is kind of winnow that down into a standardized process so districts across the state are procuring the same type of service.
Could I interrupt to be rude and say, how about there's a state bid that you can go to?
So that was idea number one, actually. And from what I understand through prior conversations, that was posed, I believe, I don't know by who, but it was posed to DAS. And there wasn't an interest to do a state bid on it. That was one of the first things we talked about was, we use, especially the smaller districts, use DAS contracts for a ton of work. And that would be definitely a step in the right direction. So we were hoping like that something was going to be developed by DAS for the tech schools, for the use at the tech schools, that we could ride off of that. But again, my concern is that we're all looking at the same thing, because even I've been with a couple different districts in the past few years, and just the pricing that various groups have received is vastly different. And if you're going out to an RFP and just citing compliance with the statute, you're going to get wildly different prices back.
Ben, I appreciate your comments, and I agree with your assertion that the 5-year needs some work. To not to minimize what you said at all. Here's a but. I'm sorry. The 1 year is going to be due in January. And we have, as it stands right now, until 2026 to start the 5-year stuff. So I think that as a coalition member, the people that I'm hearing from right now, their immediate concern is to make sure that they can do their 1-year inspections properly and currently. Not to minimize anything that you're saying, because I think that you're right. I wish that everybody had as easy a time filling out the 1-year stuff as you guys seem to do. Maybe you'd be a good consultant for some of the people that we're hearing from.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I didn't do it myself, and it definitely wasn't easy. Going to a district that I was just at where they had never done it before. The district I was with prior had been doing that for over a decade, so it wasn't a big deal. But to do that from scratch is a pretty big lift. It's just one that you could do internally, and it's literally a checklist that's all laid out for you. Whereas, again, with this crew, when we talked about this a few months ago, our conversations were all around the 5-year and the pieces of legislation that were added for this working group to start to tackle are all in relation to the 5-year. The who is performing what pieces of the 5-year and developing a standardized template are now part of the charge, as I understand it. In the statute. So I'm hoping we can.
Yeah, 100%, and we got 2 years to do it. But we only have a few months to make sure that we can answer questions for people that are asking them right now on the 1 year. And I think that part of the problem is that there was never a means for people to make sure that they were doing the 1 year. The training used to be held through the Department of Public Health, right? Which seems to be a great location, because it really is about public health. DAS isn't in the training business or information business, right? They're trying to move the money around, right? So it seems as though in order to get good results out of this and to make sure that this program succeeds, we need to find a way that we can give resources to the districts that are trying to perform the 1 year. I would also suggest that we work with DAS to narrow down or to polish the forms that we have. I certainly agree with Melissa that the forms that were selected were in trying to be compliant with the statute. But I would also offer that Tools for Schools is not supposed to be a prescriptive program that you have to check every one of these boxes. It's every box that could potentially exist. And we need to figure out in Connecticut, what are the important pieces that we want to make sure people check.
So I'll just say, and I know the senator's got a hand up, I'll be very brief, just to put a fine point on this. It is really, the 1 year piece is not a straightforward issue. It could be, I think, if everyone agreed to focus on implementation on the 1 year piece and making sure that the expectation and responsibilities are clear for all the schools. But just to put a fine point on what we're talking about, one of the things that I'm dealing with right now is Granby Middle School right now has a severe mold problem. They have mold growing on the instruments. They have mold growing on the tables and the chairs, books, these kinds of things. And in meetings where we've gotten together with our local leadership and have asked them, what's the status of your inspection? The response that they got from administration was, well, yes, we know that there's mold, but it's not at a level that is hazardous to people's health. Which when I heard that, I almost fell out of my chair, because we literally have members of our coalition that are doing this work who are former educators who are permanently disabled because of lung infection that they received, that they got because of mold problems in the building that went unaddressed for years and years. This is a serious public health issue. And what we're saying is that schools, though this is supposed to be a very straightforward, low-cost walkthrough, are not doing that because they have not received direct instructions from the state that this is what you should do. These are the pieces you can put in place, whether it be a Tools for Schools committee, a health and safety committee, what have you, to do this effectively. Nobody's gotten that. And if anything, what we've seen is consulting firms that are being contracted to come in and handle the 1 year inspection. We don't actually know if there's a multidisciplinary team walking through the building and checking these things. So I'll get off my soapbox in just a second, but I will say that one of the easy things that we can do, and Melissa, we can work on this offline, is that each of the checklists, Tools for Schools checklist that's currently up on the web, also come with a backgrounder piece that is not currently listed. And so there may be 1 or 2 that need to be developed, and we're actually working on those right now. But I think that would be a good first step, is to put actually a description of how to use each of those checklists right up there on the web.
Thanks, Lou. We welcome your support and this group's support in making sure that the schools get the right resources in order to meet this requirement. So just want to say thanks again for your partnership on that.
Absolutely.
Just want to jump in and quickly add that I really hope districts are not hiring and expending money on consultants for the Tools for Schools walkthrough. That's definitely not my understanding, the intent. So we can circle back to that. Julie,
There
sorry.
are companies on the prowl for that right now. I think that might be where some of that's coming from. I know that was not, Tools for Schools was never intended to be something provided by a consultant. Like I said, it's been around for a long time. Those forms are like from the 90s.
Yeah,
It's
exactly,
nothing
right.
new. But there are consultants now that are making the rounds to districts going, hey, are you confused? Well, here, let us help you. So I think that's where a lot of that might be coming from.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Ben. Julie?
Hi, and I really wanted to just say that I interrupted Anne, and I know her hand has been up. But one of the things I do think we can try and make happen is to really get better instructions to the schools about what we have done here and what we intended. It's something we should take seriously quickly, because, when you say that, Ben, it's just so disappointing, because our intention was not to create that kind of confusion, and we can straighten it out. And I keep turning off my camera because my internet is unstable. I apologize. Anne, please, I interrupted you.
Oh, no, I just, I am very upset to hear that schools are hiring folks to do this. And I want to just re-emphasize what we've heard from Matt and Ben and others. Tools for Schools is not just the checklist. The checklists are to be used by a team that can learn about, we have unit ventilators, we have exhaust only open window systems, we have a central system. It has to be maintained. It's not finger pointing, it's learning from maintenance and getting feedback from teachers and the school nurse and parents, and working iteratively to build and prioritize and take what feedback they get and really to collate it and to make decisions about, well, we can focus on this now, and then we're a little more educated about our own health and safety, so we can come to the table with solutions and ideas. I would almost think a better way to confirm that this program has been launched would be to ask, do you have a committee, and who's on your committee, or what job titles, or something like that. I think submitting checklists, I can appreciate that as documentation, you've done something, but it's really, I don't think the end goal, if you just gather a lot of checklists and don't know the next step. And most districts in the country never had specialized training. They used the kit and the backgrounders and all the videos and fact sheets and resources, and educated themselves on how to build a team. And it's actually an approach to health and safety that I would love to see in every work site. You're in a machine shop, take the resources about what's a safe machine shop, educate yourself, and review qualitatively the best practices. That's what Tools for Schools is getting at. So maybe documentation that in fact you have a committee, and that committee has met, and when have they met, or something would be a way to, because this should be at every year, building and working toward that as a goal.
I love that suggestion. Thank you. Do you have a committee? Who is on your committee? When did you meet? Kind of thing. Thanks, Anne.
That's a great idea.
Stephen?
Yeah, Anne just took my thunder. I was just going to say the same thing. That it begins with a committee that has a complementary set of skills, and that has a plan, and that they actually meet regularly, and they actually take action on the problems that they find. And that's required by law for every workplace that has 25 or more employees already. It's amazing how few workplaces actually have those active committees. Yeah, years ago when I did an analysis where I was able to get problems solved, it was when I did an inspection. Literally doing an inspection puts eyes on the problem, and makes the employer pay attention to the solutions that you come up with. So getting an active committee that does a walkthrough once a year is a great thing. And that should be the first question.
Love that. Here we are, building consensus. Yeah, and I'm so sorry. I can't tell your first name from your
I'm sorry.
Patrick.
It's Patrick
Thank you.
Bradbury.
I'm so sorry. Go
No
ahead.
problem. So thank you for putting this time together for all of us. I am Director of Facilities for the Milford Public Schools here in Milford, and I'm also the president of the Connecticut Building and Grounds Association. So we have spent a lot of time talking about tools for schools, and we are actually trying to get Kenny, and I would like to talk to Anne when we're done, about doing some consulting for us to help our members have a better feel for the tools for schools. That's the biggest pressure our group is feeling right now. And I think part of it is they look at these forms and we think we have to do every piece of equipment, every single room, every unit ventilator. And after we went to Pullman and Connolly, they put on a whole presentation for us. My understanding was we don't have to do every single piece of equipment, nor every unit ventilator in every building every year. But we want to get this conversation going with the entire school community to talk about their spaces. But I would like some clarity on that. I'm not sure if we need to do every single piece of equipment, because the checklists they ask for a room, they ask for a unit number. So those are some things that I need to bring back to our group to really get this kicked off, because the Connecticut Building and Grounds Association, we're the ones that are going to drive this through the schools. And we want to make sure we're crystal clear on what we're doing. And we've talked to Matt. Matt's been a big help with us on our 5-year. So I guess that's where we could really use the help, is really getting a little more clarity on exactly what's expected for the start of the year. So thank you.
And is it okay if I let you respond to that? Sort of, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I feel like you're our expert here.
Yeah. Well, I would encourage you, the whole framework, that if you get a hold of the actual Tools for Schools kit, it does provide that type of guidance that you're looking for, and really is meant to educate the team about, you know, what is a unit ventilator baby. You don't do every single classroom, but you learn that filters haven't been changed because staffing is not allowing for that, and you document as a priority, and let's make sure we have, you know, some systematic changes of filters, etc. I'd be happy to chat offline, but I wouldn't be able to provide that resource that had been provided in the past by the DPH. I just was a member of a team that they would pull together to do some of this outreach. So given there isn't a resource to provide official training how to launch the program, I would encourage you to look at, there are the how to get started videos on the website, and get the kit itself, and it's a how to get started approach, because I agree, it's not every checklist in every room. It's getting a flavor for priorities and to educate the team about how their systems operate and what potential resources and hazards are.
I actually think that's really helpful, Anne. Thank you. And that those resources are available and within the toolkit. Patrick,
They are, yep.
do you
It's
have
more
anything
than
you want to respond
checklists.
to?
You sort of need the whole kit, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, we do have we have the whole
Great.
kit. We're going through it, and we're trying to help. But when you try and go through that whole kit, you start as a facilities director.
Yeah.
With our plate is pretty full to begin with, and we take
Right.
indoor air quality very seriously. We react instantly, and we are constantly. I mean, PM is our thing. If
Yeah.
we're not looking at the units and we're not making sure everybody's happy, we have an issue. So we are very in tune to whatever a smell could come from anything. We are, you know, as facility directors, I mean, we hate that phone call that something's going on, and we're on it, and our guys are on it. But we just want to, we already have work order systems that we work with, and we're trying to integrate it into that. So that form will just spit out when we're doing a PM for something
Yeah.
that'll help with those checklists. So we're really looking at everything. So thank you.
Right. And that's why the team was I observed was so valuable, because someone like yourself was on the team explaining, you know, I only have 4 people, and you know, one person opens a window and another person gets pollen, and you know, that infiltrates, and you know, it's a careful balance of thermal comfort and sources, but people start to care about each other and recognize, and that's what I meant about prioritizing. It's knowing how hard it is to achieve what you're trying to do.
Correct. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. That was super valuable. Matt, you've been very patiently waiting.
So Anne said it very nicely and diplomatically, but I think that it's clear that one of the problems that we have is that this used to be owned by DPH, and they don't have this program anymore. They don't have the training. I think it's not fair to try and put that onto DAS. And so really we could all sit around here and agree that we need to have information get out to everybody, but it shouldn't have to be Pat who hires a consultant to come and talk to the Buildings and Grounds Association. We as a group and as a state should be able to provide this for all of the municipalities that we're requiring to do this, without having individual interest groups have to take up that slack by themselves. So I guess my real question is, what as a working group can we recommend to the legislature to solve that as a problem? And yeah, certainly we know that there's additional funds that have already been approved and given to DAS for a grant program. We know that the current grant program is not going to be renewed because of a lack of enough money to do another round of grant funding, according to their release. So certainly I would say, well, why can't we use some of that money to put a position or two at DPH to have an Ann Bracker or a Kenny Foscue at DPH? We need a person there that can be that resource that DAS can call, that can provide the full toolkits to every municipality and to figure out whether it's going to be online training or in-person training to help the districts that are starting from scratch and don't have, Ben's team that's been around for 20 years. So if we're going to require them to do this, we need to help put the tools in their pocket to be able to comply.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was very easy to get off the ground years ago because that's when Kenny was around. I remember, like, again, I'm going back like a decade, and he would come in and set up. We would have him consult with sometimes an individual school because we had school-based teams. But then when he retired or wherever he went, the whole program kind of died with him. Some districts kept it going, other districts abandoned it. But yeah, I think if DPH handled the training side on the 1 year and DAS helped out with a contract on the 5 year, man, we just made short work of this thing.
Really appreciate that concrete suggestion, or suggestions for both the 1 year and the 5 year. One caveat I'll make, and this is not to say we shouldn't pursue it, just like when you say that money that was originally allocated that we will no longer have access, it's not like sitting there waiting for us, right? So we'll have to likely fight all over again for new allocations for this. And we'll need DPH to decide, hey, if we're going to get this pot of money, this is where we would want to spend it. Sometimes those are part of the challenge. So just to kind of like put out the full landscape for what's ahead. And I don't want to speak for Melissa nor put her on the spot, but if I've said anything that you think is inaccurate, please correct me. Okay. And I don't know if Julie wants to add anything to that either, but I think that these two suggestions, the way you laid them out, Ben, sounded consistent with what you were saying also, Matt, which is that, Kenny-esque person back at DPH was invaluable to the districts to help get these programs going and also just providing consistency year over year for schools to have and districts to have a resource within DPH to perform these tools for schools walkthroughs. And then also the state bid would really simplify things for districts and understanding sort of the scope and what's desired for the 5 year. Am I hearing that correctly? And if anyone's disagreeing, I hope you feel comfortable saying that. Okay. So
it seems that DAS is helpful to be an administrator of this and to ensure the compliance, and they've already taken on that role. Just the Department of Public Health seems to be the right fit for advocating and helping people get to that finish line.
I'm looking at the clock. We aren't going to get to 2 of the 4 things on this agenda. I think that's totally fine because this felt like a really productive conversation today. And it might make sense. And Julie, please jump in. I'm sorry I'm talking so much this time, you guys. For our next agenda to put maybe the bid and like what specifically could be on there. Kind of, Ben, I'm sorry, this is what you thought this meeting was going to be. But it's been quite a while since we met. So I actually found this really helpful. I hope you guys did too. And apologies if it wasn't a productive use of your time, but it was helpful for me. But to talk specifically about what would be helpful on a bid. And, ideally if you want to send those things to the senator and I, and maybe even include Melissa in the nearer term, so we can have some suggestions to put forward to everybody before we meet again. That could also be a more productive use of our time. So we're not waiting until the next meeting to continue this conversation. But Julie, please jump in. I've talked too much.
Oh, I appreciate how much you've talked. You haven't talked too much, first of all, but you've kept us going, and I'm not in a great spot to help, and I will try and be in a better place next time. But I do agree that this was a good discussion because this has been something that has been brewing for a long time. And I want to say how much I appreciate DAS's patience because they've really been working very hard to address these things and to make sure that as a state, the state is living up to its statutory obligation from the previous legislation we've passed. I do think it'd be important to just at least have a moment that we talk about the air purifier issues. If we have, I know we've got about 6 minutes, but does that make sense to you, Representative?
Feel free.
Great. I know I have gotten letters from a young person saying how valuable the Corsi Rosenthal air purifiers are. I've checked around, and I'm sure you got a letter like that, Representative. And I'm pretty sure that that's gone to leadership and the governor's office as well. And I know that UConn Health and UConn have worked hard to get the budget ready for the next meeting so that they could be on the agenda for the bonding that we suggested, that we mandated in legislation. I don't know for sure that that's going to happen, but I think there are people who are working hard to see that it gets onto the next agenda. If someone knows differently, you should, fill us in, but that's the latest information that I have on it. So I'm still hopeful that we'll see that money come through so that this program can get off the ground. I know that there was some concern that this was an approach that would engage children in child labor. As someone who has devoted my entire career prior to being a senator to organizing workers and protecting workers, I don't see it that way at all. I think it's a learning curriculum that at the same time really provides an incredible resource for our schools that is more affordable and just as or more effective. And so I'm really still very hopeful that this program will get off the ground. That's just my 2 cents on it, but if anyone's heard differently, I think it'd be good to hear from them.
Matthew came first.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Thank you. I feel like I've been talking more than you, Representative.
That's the way it should be.
I think that there's 2 things that we're talking about here when we talk about air purifier eligibility. The bonding authorization legislation that was passed included funds for University of Connecticut to provide filtration boxes and training for all of the schools to put them together. There was also some allocated monies in that for other types of portable air purifiers, several $1 million worth of funding. There's been a lot of concern about that, namely, and not to get too technical, anybody off of the street can go to Sharper Image and buy a room air purifier, right? What we don't know is how effective they are, whether or not they've been tested properly, and whether or not they're a right use of our money. There's new testing protocol that has been developed by ASHRAE, the Society of Engineers. That's an international organization that actually, instead of testing these things inside of a bubble, inside of a vacuum, they actually go to a site where air purifiers are installed and do a test where they figure out how effective they actually are and whether or not they're producing any byproducts that are unintended. Ozone is a big thing that happens with a lot of these. And so certainly one of my recommendations from a technical perspective is not to buy the snake oil, but to make sure that anything that would be getting dollars approved gets put through a rigorous scientific testing process to make sure that it's effective and safe before we dump some money into it. Furthermore, you look at some of these things and boy, you can get a great air purifier for $100 from Sharper Image, but it's just like one of the copiers that you buy. All right, well, we're going to give you a little bit of toner, but then you have to spend $500 for replacement filters, right? And the first one only lasts for 3 months. So making sure that we're effectively doing that for the ones that are different than the UConn program, I think is certainly one of the concerns. The UConn program in and of itself, when we've talked to folks from UConn and the coalition, they've also said that they can be a resource with Tools for Schools as they deliver these to the schools. They could be working with the health and safety committees and being another avenue for pushing out the information and the training and the processes. So I think that could potentially be a win-win for all of us. And I certainly support and hope that program moves forward as well.
Concur with that, if I may. I concur with that, and I think one of the reasons why the UConn piece is so important is because when it comes to talking about independent scientific review, it's the UConns of the world that we would look to help really give us the guidance to figure out what is appropriate use of state money, you know, from a safety and efficacy point of view. I don't really have much of a concern about the UConn piece. I also see that as a good teaching opportunity. What I have said, and I think we've talked about it with this group before, is that we want to make sure that there's some criteria around the store-bought air purifiers, because we understand that every one of these vendors has a variety of different products that are on the market. Some of them are very straightforward, like a HEPA filter type of a thing, which is essentially what my understanding is of the UConn Corsi box project is designing DIY HEPA filters, really. But as Matt Cole mentioned before, some of these other systems do create hazardous byproducts. And so we have put forward some considerations to help develop some criteria around this so that we know. And I think that one of those criteria should be that there's been a genuine independent review on safety and efficacy. And I'll also just add that I've had some recent conversations with some of these vendors, and there is at least one that have looked at those criteria that we put out and said, you know, this makes perfect sense. You know, you don't want to have a system like this, you know, that creates byproducts in a closed environment with small developing bodies. And I appreciated that. And they also offered to help work with us on developing some of these criteria. So I do think that there are folks in that space that are looking at this with a health equity perspective. I do think there's a role for both of these things, but I think we also need to define what that role is and figure out if one of these things is more appropriate as a stopgap solution, whereas another one might be more appropriate as a supplemental air purification solution. But in order to do that, I think we need to make sure that the ASHRAE standard is met first, that schools are on their way towards doing their inspections and their HVAC upgrades and this kind of thing, and that we're not putting money towards store-bought purifiers unless we actually know that they're going to be serving a specific role. So that's kind of my perspective on it.
Thanks, Lou. Steve, oh, John, do you want to say something quick? You're on mute.
Thank you. Really quickly, we were obviously very in tune with the UConn program, with the nursing. We have them in pretty much every classroom in town. Partly they just adopted us and we went forward with it. I will say, however, there's much more to it. Teachers don't like them. Teachers don't use them. They become trip hazards and dust collectors. So they are very good for a short gap measure, but I think long-term, a central air system with the proper maintenance and filtering is much more important. Again, you have OSHA issues, you have cords hanging around, and it interrupts the teaching because of the volume of the fans. So maybe air purifiers from Sharper Image would have better sound issues, But I think you got to talk to teachers about whether they really want the distractions too. So they were very helpful during COVID when we had nothing as an alternative, because they're quick, they're cost effective. I'm just not so sure long term it's the right solution, and I'll defer that to air quality experts more than myself.
Thanks, John. That's helpful. Steven, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I would say that in addition to ASHA, we should look to NIOSH. NIOSH's job is to make sure that workers are safety, and they do testing of various equipment to protect them, personal protective equipment and otherwise. I should think that we should look to NIOSH to see if they've done any kind of criteria documents for air purifying respirators.
All right, thank you for that. All right, I want to be sensitive to everyone's time. Really grateful for everyone joining us today. I think a lot of food for thought and some really good concrete next steps. Julie and I will work with Cameron, get a next meeting scheduled. But with that, Julie, do you want to have any closing remarks?
No, I'm just always so impressed with this group and all the people who participate here. You all bring so much expertise and good suggestions, and I've been really happy that we've been able to keep this going. It's a daunting problem to solve because of the number of schools we have, because of the cost, because of the age of the schools. And John, I really appreciate what your input just now, because it offers a little bit of a different perspective than we had heard. But I think that what you said about the real solution is to have, good HVAC systems is really, we have to keep that front and center. We're not over the crisis. I think COVID really opened our eyes to the ventilation problems in our schools. But that problem isn't solved when we get through the pandemic. It is still there, and it affects students and teachers in many other ways, including the spread of colds and other infections and people's health long-term for the people who work in these buildings. It's something that's extremely costly, but it has to be a priority in our long-term plans for the state. So much depends on it. So I really appreciate everybody you've devoted so much time, the people on this, so much of your volunteer time, and I really appreciate everything you've suggested, and we take it to heart, and it's good for legislators to hear this. So we'll bring it back to our colleagues and continue to push for these things. And thank you, Representative Leeper, for chairing this meeting. You do such a great job.
Thanks, everyone. We'll be in touch soon.
Take care.
Stay well.